It's the sixth Saturday of protests from the so-called Yellow Vests. Despite a sharp drop in numbers of demonstrators, violent scuffles broke out on the iconic Champs-Élysées Avenue. The partial shutdown of the government will stretch on through Christmas. Some 800,000 federal workers are impacted by the no deal over the budget for the wall on the US-Mexico border. And French President Macron is in Chad to cheer the troops with a Christmas feast and stresses how important the G5 Sahel's mission is to combat the Islamic State group. Hello, welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. We begin in Indonesia, where at least 43 people have been killed in a tsunami that has hit beaches around Sunda Strait between the islands of Sumatra and Java. Now, more than 580 people have been injured and hundreds of homes destroyed. This, according to the government disaster agency. Authorities say that tsunami may have been triggered by the combination of the new moon and an underwater landslide following the eruption of the volcano Krakatoa. It was thought to be a tidal surge, but the wave, according to witnesses, was between 15 and 20 meters, leading the residents into a panic who fled for higher ground. The death toll will most likely rise. We will bring you more, of course, as we get it. Now, here in France, there was a lower turnout nationwide of the so-called Yellow Vest movement. Over 38,000 people demonstrated across the country. It was the sixth time that protests took place on a Saturday, despite Macron's moves giving in to some of their demands. The French Senate had approved the president's raft of measures to help pensioners and the forgotten working poor, but it did not stop around 2,000 demonstrating around the French capital. Not discouraged by the small turnout, some explained why they are still showing up in their yellow vests. Take a listen.
There needs to be a sixth republic. Everything must change. I'm tired of giving everything to the rich. As long as we're here, we won't give up. We've planned on protesting on Christmas Day and coming back in the new year.
I've supported the movement for about a month, because everyday life is becoming harder. Taxes weigh too heavily on us. We don't make money by working in France anymore.
We will be staying until the end. There is no negotiation. No negotiation with the government. Some yellow vesters and political parties may be willing to negotiate, but not me.
Well, it wasn't expected to be as violent as we saw the first two Saturdays of the month. 220 people were detained in total on the sixth act, with 81 placed in police custody. There were small demonstrations around touristic areas and some clashes on the famed avenue, the Champs-Élysées, as Anka Ula reports.
Well, as night fell on what organizers are calling Act 6 of the Yellow Vest movement here in Paris, tensions rose on the Champs-Élysées Avenue. A group of several dozen protesters clashed with police in the middle of the avenue, police responding with tear gas and water cannons. Now, some demonstrators, many of whom were not wearing yellow vests, throwing projectiles at those police officers. It was a very tense end to what otherwise was a calm day of protests here in Paris that began with a bit of confusion as to where exactly the demonstrations would take place. One group was here on the Champs-Élysées, another group began at Montmartre, the tallest hill in Paris, and were slowly moved and dispersed by police. There were small groups scattered across the city. Now, the movement itself was not very centralized today, a bit disorganized, people saying the message is still a peaceful message, but the messages are mixed here. You have some hardliners that are trying to completely overhaul the entire French government. You have some other more moderate protesters that are saying that the concessions the government made are not enough, but they are a step in the right directions. These protesters, however, are saying that they will continue throughout the holidays, throughout the new year, and they will keep coming here to demonstrate for their rights, for what they believe is right.
Anka Ula reporting a little earlier on the Champs-Élysées. Now, U.S. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell claimed that the Senate will meet again on the 27th of December, meaning the partial shutdown of the government will stretch on through Christmas. Trump has postponed his trip to Florida to stay at the White House, trying to negotiate with the Democrats the funding of the wall on the U.S.-Mexico border he had promised in his campaign. The Republican Party still controls both the House and Senate, but in January the House comes under Democratic control, so Trump has all the reasons to see his funding bill of $5.7 billion to pass by Congress before the end of 2018. Our correspondent in Washington, David Smith, has the details.
There is perhaps at the start of January when Democrats take control of the House of Representatives after that blue wave we saw in the midterm elections. And today, Nancy Pelosi, expected to become the House Speaker, is promising she will immediately pass legislation to reopen the government. Until then, we appear to be at this impasse, certainly until Thursday, when some talks will resume. I think workers will really start to feel the pinch of this, perhaps on Wednesday after the Christmas break, when many of them would have been coming back to their offices, but instead, in hundreds of thousands of cases, they'll have to stay home and not get paid. Really, Donald Trump appears to have made a political calculation here that it's just too costly for him to give up on his demands for a wall on the US-Mexico border. When he appeared to be giving up, there was ferocious blowback from far-right conservatives, including some of the radio hosts he listens to. So he changed his views. He stuck to the wall proposal, and he now seems to have calculated better to stick that out, even if it means a shutdown all the way through to the new year, rather than be seen to be caving in. There are some on the far right who will certainly applaud that stance. They were speaking in very apocalyptic terms of if Trump caves in now to the Democrats, this is the end of his presidency. He'll have broken his central promise on the wall. But that's certainly a minority view in the country as a whole. And there are plenty of others, including, I think, some Republicans, certainly in the Senate, but also Democrats, independents, and many commentators who see this part of a wider issue, a real meltdown in the Trump government in the last few days, coming at the same time we've seen the departures of Jim Mattis, the defense secretary, and today Brett McGurk, the lead person on anti-ISIS efforts. The stock market in disarray, stocks at their lowest for 8 decades, staff turnover at the White House. The government shutdown is really being seen as part of the dysfunction of the Trump administration, and he's taking a lot of criticism for that, and yet more speculation of whether he can really survive 4 years as president.
Following Jim Mattis's decision to quit as Secretary of Defense after Trump's announcement on getting U.S. troops out of Syria, the U.S. Special Envoy to the anti-Islamic State group coalition has now also resigned. Brett McGurk says to be in shock and that Trump's decision was a complete reversal of policy. He was appointed in the job since 2015 in the Obama administration and will leave at the end of the year. Cole Stangler has more.
Jordan, of course, was a founding member of our counter-ISIS convoy.
Yet another resignation from a top post in Washington. After the high-profile departure of Jim Mattis, Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, Brett McGurk is the latest to leave an increasingly chaotic White House. Appointed in 2015 by Barack Obama, the U.S. Special Envoy for the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS had supported an American presence in Syria. According to the U.S. press, McGurk had been planning to leave the post in February, but sped up his departure after the president announced the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria, a move that stunned someone who just days ago was making the case for American boots on the ground. Over the last few months, top military brass in Washington have opposed a quick retreat from Syria, a move they fear could empower the allies of Bashar al-Assad. But just hours after McGurk announced his exit, Trump defended his strategy on Twitter.
When I became president, ISIS was going wild. Now, ISIS is largely defeated.
The resignation adds to the woes of the U.S. president, who's already reeling from a partial government shutdown, expected to last the next few days.
President Emmanuel Macron went to visit French troops based in Chad this Saturday, bringing a bit of Christmas cheer to the 1,300 soldiers with champagne, foie gras and chocolates. He first met with President Idriss Déby and spoke with other commanders from the UK, Estonia, Germany and Spain that are also taking part in the campaign against Islamic jihadists in the country. Let's take a listen.
This spirit of cooperation, this partnership, is also one we share with our allies. Our American ally, of course, whose support is so critical, and that I salute here, with whom cooperation is so exemplary. We understand what it means to be allies. It means consistency, longevity, and the ability to closely coordinate.
The ceasefire in Yemen remains fragile after it was put in place earlier in the week in Hodeidah. The port city is to stay neutral with both warring parties. The government forces and the Houthis are to drop arms and make it possible for aid and goods to have access to the harbour. A United Nations team has arrived in the war-torn country to monitor and secure the truce signed in Sweden.
Hours after it was approved, the UN mission in Yemen is set up. Dutch General Patrick Kamait, in charge of the team, has touched down in Aden. He is now due to meet members of the Hadi government recognised by the international community. On Saturday, a security detail travelled to the port city of Hodeidah in the west of Yemen to assess the situation ahead of the arrival of the official mission. In New York, the 15 members of the Security Council had unanimously approved to send a UN observation mission.
The resolution has been unanimously agreed.
Its objective, to ensure that the ceasefire is respected. The agreement follows the negotiations led in Stockholm last week between the Tehran-backed Houthi rebels and the Saudi-backed government at the head of an Arab coalition. Hodeidah is a strategic point on the Red Sea and the main transition point for imports into Yemen, supplies which have been lacking during the 4-year civil war. Under the guidance of General Kamait, the UN will have to secure the port and oversee the evacuation of civilians. He has already been deployed to South Sudan and the Democratic Republic of Congo. According to the United Nations, the Yemen conflict has caused an unprecedented crisis which has already cost the lives of over 10,000 people.
Ports in Malta and Italy are closed as the NGO Proactiva Open Arms have rescued over 300 migrants, including pregnant women, children and babies, from 3 vessels in difficulty off the coast of Libya. The migrants have now been given permission by Spain's Foreign Ministry to head towards the country's coast. Here's Cole Stangler with the latest.
Still waiting to make landfall. More than 300 migrants received some good news when Spain authorized their rescue ship to sail to its waters. It'll land at Algeciras. According to Spanish NGO Proactiva Open Arms, which operates the ship and rescued the migrants off the Libyan coast on Friday. It's had trouble finding a port since then. First, Malta turned the boat away, with its Coast Guard rescuing just a mother and a newborn baby by helicopter. Then Italy rejected the ship, with the country's far-right interior minister celebrating in a tweet.
Italian ports are closed. For the traffickers of human beings and for those who help them, the fun is over.
In stark contrast to Pedro Sanchez's government in Spain, which has taken in more migrants by sea this year than the past 3 years combined, Italy's government has clamped down on migration. Matteo Salvini's interior ministry counted 9,500 arrivals on the Italian coast between June and November this year. That's down from 57,000 over the same period last year. Still in the Mediterranean, the Open Arms ship will likely spend Christmas at sea. A trip to the Spanish coast takes between 5 and 6 days.
Now let's go back to that top story. For those who have just joined us, in Indonesia, at least 43 people have been killed in a tsunami that has hit beaches around Sunda Strait between the islands of Sumatra and Java. More than 580 people have been injured and hundreds of homes destroyed. This according to the Government Disaster Agency. Authorities say the tsunami may have been triggered by the combination of the new moon and an underwater landslide following the eruption since June of the volcano Krakatoa. It was thought to be a tidal surge, but the wave, according to witnesses, was between 15 and 20 meters, leading the residents into a panic, fleeing for higher ground. Now, some are already looking for their loved ones. The death toll will most likely rise, and we will, of course, bring you more as we get it. You're up to date with the latest. Stay tuned to France 24.